Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Good morning. Good morning. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, with another very important subject. The subject today is credit and debt. It's almost like two sides of one coin, right? On the one hand, you get credit, it automatically becomes debt. I think it's no secret to that. The full name is actually finances, credit, and debt. We're going to be talking about what is credit, defining it, how you build it, how you protect it, how you repair it. We're going to talk about debt, how you control it. What do you do when you are drowned in debt? The country in general, the country as a country has, I believe, close to 20 trillion debt, 20 trillion if I'm not mistaken. But as individuals, as citizens, we also have a lot of debt. So we're going to be dealing with all that good stuff, and also what are the options where you're drowned in debt? And I think there's a lot of that in our country. So I have three guests with me today, and I'm going to introduce each one of you by name, and then I'm going to ask you to basically tell us who you work for, who you represent, and basically what you do, what services you and your entity provide. Let me start here, and I have Sully Richardson, right, Sully?
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining our show. Welcome, and take it away.
Thank you for having us, having me. My name is Sully Richardson, and I work for Desert Financial Credit Union, and we are the largest locally owned credit union here in the Valley. And my job is to teach financial wellness classes out in the community.
Okay.
And a lot of times people would recognize it as financial literacy, but we want to call it financial wellness because it has a more positive twist to it. When you talk about being financial illiterate, it has a negative connotation to it. So
I agree.
We want to help people just to improve their financial well-being.
Perfect. Now, I did ask you earlier in very brief, what is the difference between a credit union and a bank? Any difference?
Yes. Credit union is not-for-profit, financial cooperative, and it's membership-based.
Membership-based.
And that's the bottom line, is that when you're a part of a membership base, you should get some special perks, or you should see a difference than the general public. And all of our members become part owner when you join a credit union. So we still make money.
So does that translate to better rates?
Better rates, lower fees.
Okay.
The minimums are lower on accounts. The overall culture of a credit union, because you're part of a membership, you should see a difference when you walk into any one of our facilities.
And how do people access your services? Just anybody?
So we are community chartered.
Okay.
Probably for the past 10, 15 years, we've been community charter. And what that means is that anyone that lives, works, or worship in Maricopa, Gila, or Pinal County is eligible to join our credit union.
Thank you, Sully. Let's go to Arturo Gonzales. Arturo Gonzales, you are an attorney. Go ahead. First of all, thank you. Thank you for making time to be with us. Welcome. Name and who you work for and what type of services you offered and see on a kind of daily basis.
Absolutely. First off, David, thank you for having us on the show. And yes, my name is Arturo Gonzales, young attorney, and I work for a law firm here in Phoenix called Riley, Carlock, and Applewhite. We're actually celebrating our 70th anniversary this year.
Congratulations.
So
That's a lot of years.
Been around for some time.
Wow.
I work primarily doing litigation in the litigation practice group area of the firm. But in that, part of our firm, we have a bankruptcy group and some bankruptcy attorneys. So I have done a couple of cases with some of our bankruptcy lawyers. And throughout the process, I've been able to see sort of some of the ins and outs of bankruptcy law, which, as any bankruptcy lawyer will tell you, is extremely complicated.
Right.
But hopefully we can dispel some myths here today to the public, and offer any advice we can.
Now, when you say you're a young attorney, tell me from the time you were in school, I assume that this is a hard career, to now being an attorney, what is the difference in workload? Is it less or more or about the same?
Yeah, so I work at a pretty large law firm. So as a young attorney, I graduated in 2016 from Arizona State University. So the first couple of years in practice, as anyone will tell you, whether it's at a large firm or if you go solo, are always sort of the hardest years.
Right.
You're learning and you're getting in there and you're really just figuring out what this thing is called.
So lots
law.
of work.
Yeah.
It doesn't decrease from leaving school. Now,
No,
how about
absolutely not.
debt? Because there's this assumption, and we're talking about credit and debt. You're a young attorney. I assume that you incur a lot of debt to be able to graduate as an attorney.
Oh, absolutely.
And is that basically across the board? Typically, most attorneys will incur lots of debt.
I think that, yes, you are, especially now more and more, not just graduate students, but even undergraduate students are incurring a lot of debt.
Now, unless they already had the money beforehand,
Absolutely.
right? They inherited it or something.
Yeah.
Arturo, thank you so much, and we'll engage
Thank you.
as we go. Now, let's come to Brad. Brad, go ahead and tell us also, Brad, who you work for and then what you do.
I'm with Community Legal Services. We're a nonprofit legal aid law firm. I do the consumer work there, which includes credit and debt, including advising people on student loan issues, which Arturo referenced. And we also provide bankruptcy assistance and advice. We represent people who qualify for our services in 5 counties in Arizona, including Maricopa County.
Right. So from what I gathered, because I did a lot of research to find you, and it's Community Legal Services. So you're still a firm then, right?
We're a nonprofit law
A
firm.
nonprofit law firm, but you can only help people who qualified based on income, correct?
Correct. And it's based on federal poverty guidelines, but just because your income may exceed federal poverty guidelines does not mean you will not qualify, because you're allowed to subtract from your income certain basic necessities like food and rent. And I would encourage anyone with questions in any area we handle to apply for our services.
Even if someone does not qualify based on income, are you still do you still offer like a session where you advise people, or that has to come first, the eligibility?
If they do not qualify, we would have to give them some very brief advice on where they could seek legal assistance from a law firm that is from a source that is not tied to our economic restrictions.
Thank you. That's a great service. By the way, another attorney, Larry Sandigo, referred me to you, so that's how I found you. Oh. And we held a conversation over the phone, and we've been going back and forth, just trying to find out what resources are out there, both for a nonprofit, free, and then for profit for a pay. Let's get to the subject, and let me ask you if you join me in defining, first of all, what is credit. In learning the root word of the word credit in Spanish, and if you go to Latin, basically the verb form, because credit is a noun, and the verb form in Latin translated to Spanish is to believe.
To believe?
Yes. That is the word to creer. So that means that when somebody gives you money, they are believing in you. And if you're not believable, if your rate of belief, trust is not there, they're not going to lend you money. And if they do, it's going to cost you a lot of money. That loan is going to cost you a lot of money, because you're not believable. You've done some wrong things in your life, and you have no credit, no credibility, no trust. Therefore, nobody will ask you to lend you money, and if they do, what are they going to do, Suli? What I mean is the interest rate. What happens with the interest rates if they lend them the money?
If they lend the money and the person is not credible,
Right.
then their rate's probably going to be high.
Right.
Very high.
Yes.
You're not going to get the good rates.
So that's basically the concept of credit, correct? And I also said that credit and debt is almost like a coin with two sides. On the one hand, you get credit, and it automatically becomes debt. Am I correct on that?
Could be.
Could be. Okay.
Depending on how it's handled, because credit really is the ability to borrow money, goods, or services now and pay it back later.
So that's a positive note.
Right.
And let me ask you, anyone to explain to us what is the FICO score, the FICO score.
I have spoken with people in the industry who work with these scores. It's a measure of your credit or your credibility to repay the debt.
The score is determined by a few different things. Your FICO score is determined by your payment history, whether on your loans,
Right.
whether you paid them or didn't pay them, or if you have debt or a service that you did not pay for and it ends up in collection, then that affects your payment history.
So how well you behave in making your payments over
Payment
a long
history,
period
yeah.
of time.
So
correct?
35% of whatever your score is made up of your payment history. 30% of whatever your score is made up of amounts owed, and that's in loans.
Right. So if you have a big chunk of money that you owe,
Could affect you in a good way or a positive way. Just
right.
depends on your
Right.
circumstances. And then 15% of what makes up your score is your length of credit history.
right.
And then 10% is new credit. The other 10 is a mix of credit.
Right. Now, what is considered a good score that is going to grant you the possibility of getting a low APR,
So the-
annual percentage rate?
The range is from 350 up to 850. Score,
So
yes.
the better the credit, the lower the APR is going to be, correct?
And credit is extended to you more freely. You get a lot of offers. You get the best of the best.
Would like us
Right.
to review when we come back the different types of loans, and then there's this concept of good debt and bad debt. There are some debts that is considered good, like you buy a house. That's considered good debt. Student loans are supposed to be good debt because it's supposed to, enable you in the near future to be marketable, as they say, to get better jobs, and eventually you'll pay them off, and then you'll be better off. A car is supposed to be a not so good a loan because the moment you take it out of the dealership, it loses value. Correct. So we'll address some of those issues. Stay with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. With this is a great subject, but it could be a very bad situation if people have incurred a lot of debt. And sometimes people drown in debt. And it's almost like a vicious cycle. A bad experience can lead to a worse experience, and then until you find yourself in need of filing bankruptcy, Arturo, correct? I mean, bankruptcy is like the ultimate step that people want to be in, and I'm sure you're going to be able to share with us the pros and cons of doing it and the process, etc. Why don't we just briefly, let's talk about the different types of loans that are out there. What type of loans are out there?
There can be secured debt, which means you've pledged collateral, whether it be your home or the car is probably the most common asset.
So you mean a mortgage has that collateral?
The house is the collateral.
Okay. And then the car in the case of a loan for a car.
That's
Okay.
collateral, which means the creditor can take that asset if you don't make the payments. And then there is unsecured debt, which is no collateral. That generally can be
Credit card, perhaps?
credit card debt is unsecured.
Right. That's an important concept, I think, because when it comes to bankruptcy, that's going to play a big part, correct? Especially, but also along the way, because they can be a repo, right? Repossession of a vehicle.
Yeah, what happens with a repossessed car is that the lender takes the car, sells it at an auction price, which is generally very low, and then the borrower still remains liable for the deficiency, the amount remaining owed,
Right.
and can be sued for that deficiency.
Now, in terms of loans, I know off the air you were talking to Arturo about student loans. What were you talking about? Make it public.
Well,
Come on, Brad.
Many people are unaware of that there is student loan assistance. Student loans are generally not dischargeable. You can't get rid of them in bankruptcy except in very rare circumstances.
Wow.
But what you can do is you can cure the default status, get on a very low payment income-based repayment plan with the Department of Education, and after 20 years, which I admit is a long time, the loan can be discharged completely regardless of the principal balance. And this is important because if you don't deal with your student loan issues, your Social Security entitlements can be impacted when you start drawing Social Security.
Community Legal Services is your entity that you work for, and I think this point, like you said, it could be a show in itself, and who knows, we might even do a show just on student loans. Go ahead, Arturo.
Yeah, absolutely. On the subject of student loans, being a recent beneficiary of student loans, to your point of good debt, it is something that obviously pays dividends if you do it correctly. I think there's a tendency nowadays for young folks, millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, whatever you want to frame it as, but to take that extra $5,000-$6,000 for the summer and go study abroad, or do sort of mismanage that debt early on, and that can have serious repercussions later. And I think it's important for us to really inform, especially those students, and especially given the rising cost of higher education, to be hopefully a little more financially savvy early on.
So you're saying that these types of loans are totally outside of the scope of FAFSA, correct? They take them on their own, like what you just referenced, that want to go on vacation, study abroad, etc., or it can also be within the scope of FAFSA?
I think it can be both. I think through FAFSA, that determines your eligibility for federal student loans. There are private student loans outside of the FAFSA sphere, but I think normally students deal with sort of student loans within within the ambit of the application of FAFSA.
Right. And let's go to the subprime loans. In the past, we had payday loans. Now we have auto title loans. Your impression on that, Sully?
They just repackage themselves.
So what is
it's
that?
It's not good. Those loans really operate in a way a little bit differently from regular traditional lending.
So less regulations, would you say, and
the way
high
they
interest?
calculate their interest is monthly.
Monthly, as opposed to annually.
To an annual percentage rate, an APR. So if you take that 17% monthly rate, it becomes a 204% under an annual percentage rate. And so with a rate that high, the payment's huge. And if a person is going to get that kind of payment, their first month of payment, they realized that the example that I saw was a $2,400 loan rate with $2,500 that you borrow, pay back in 2 years, 17% rate. The payment was $435
Right.
a month. First payment, only $10 went to the principal.
Wow.
The Center for Responsible Lending did a study and said that the average person that got those types of loans, they refinance it 8 times.
Right,
So you
right.
dig yourself a deeper hole.
Yeah.
It doesn't solve the problem
Right.
at all. It's not a good
Not
thing.
an easy. I felt you wanted to say something, bro. You wanted to add anything on payday loans or auto title loans, or you're okay?
She very correctly stated the issue. You're paying an interest rate over 200%. You typically have to roll it over, and it is a deep hole that many people cannot climb out of without bankruptcy.
Right. Let's move on a little bit. I believe we agree that there is such a thing as bad debt and good debt. Correct? I think we are.
Yes.
We have consensus on that. A car is bad debt. A home is good debt.
So I would say
Go ahead,
something a
say
little
it,
bit
Sully.
different on a car being bad debt because
Okay.
a car will get you your transportation so that you can get to your job and
Good
keep
point.
your house
Good
and
point.
take care of your family. Many times people, you said earlier on how when you get a new car and you drive off the lot that it depreciates immediately, right? Like 10 to 15%. That's why some people, if you can, put down a down payment because then you're not upside down immediately.
Right.
So if you have to trade your car in and get another car, maybe your car, maybe you'll have that value there. So
Got it.
I don't look at car as being a bad debt.
Okay.
I really
Valid
don't.
point.
It's actually a good debt
Es-
depending
es-
on the loan.
Especially if you use your vehicle for your work.
You need it.
Right. Let's address the issue of how do you build credit? Because there's this assumption, I believe, and let me just say this up front. I believe that one of the worst debt is credit card debt. I believe so. And I think data shows that credit card debt could be the most devastating. So help us understand, how does a young person maybe, build credit? Do they have to have a car loan payment, a mortgage payment? Do they have to? Or are there other ways that credit is built?
It's really difficult for a young person just graduating maybe out of college or just a young person that's 21 applying for credit without having credit. It's almost like a catch-22. You need credit to get credit.
Right.
And so I always want to start with, do you have a spending plan, which is a budget? Start saving your own money so that you can invest in yourself. The easiest way to get credit for a young person that has nothing at all is to save your money and then borrow some of your own money. And you can do that a couple of different ways. One is to get a secure credit card, which is really easy because it's your money. You have it, it's unavailable.
So credit card, secure.
A secure credit card.
And what is the difference between that one and the regular one?
Your money is the collateral.
Okay.
So $300 minimum. Put it in an account. You can't touch it. It's your security.
And the three credit bureaus will catch onto your payment habits and they start calculating.
Get that card, use it, make at least 6 months of payments, and then you have a positive.
So
hit
you
on
do
your
not
credit
necessarily have to buy a car or buy a home to start building the credit. There's other ways. How about people who own or who just paying their bills regularly? I believe that's also taken into account. Correct, Brad?
Yes, we regularly review our clients' credit reports, and the best way to build credit, what we tell people is, regardless of the amount of the debt, pay your debts timely, pay them in full if you can, try to pay off your credit card down to a zero balance each month, and that will go a long way toward establishing credit.
And again, paying your bills, your electricity bill, your water bill. I think that's part
So
of
let me
the.
just kind of make a comment
Okay.
here with those types of services, because people believe that if you have an electric bill in your name or a cell phone in your name or water in your name that you are building credit. That is incorrect. If you don't pay those bills,
So you have to make the payments to get the credit.
Well, you make the payment, but you're really not establishing credit in credit world. Still make those payments. If you don't make those payments over a period of time, they're going to turn you over to collections. Now you've got this negative hit on your
Right,
credit.
right.
So that's how it ends up on your credit report. It's not positive.
Utility bills, correct me if I'm wrong, do not appear on a credit report. It's the debt, it's the credit payments that will impact your credit score. So your credit card payments, your car payment, that's what will affect your credit score. And that is what you should pay timely and preferably in full each month.
So, again, having a credit card, it's a good start for, say, a young person.
Discipline.
Discipline, yeah. And of course, that's without saying, right? And let's we have a couple more minutes in this segment. We're talking about credit and debt, but the bottom line, and I think the underlying issue here is, do we have a budget? Are we really, really writing down, designing our budget, and then having the discipline to stick to it? Is that really, really the main problem, do you think?
That is the problem.
So basically, we are spending money, or we are living beyond our means, as they say. That is it. I don't have money for a quinceañera. I don't have money for a trip, but who cares? I have plastic. I can go to it. I'll have the quinceañera. I don't care if it takes me 20 years to pay it off. So is that basically the bottom line?
It's a mindset.
It's a mindset.
It's a mindset. So I think in this country too, it's consumerism, right? Bigger, better, right?
Right.
Not learning to live within your means. And
Right.
debt is almost like the norm, which it really shouldn't be the norm.
Well, if I could say a word on behalf of the consumer, it's not entirely the consumer's fault. We have many people attempting to support families with jobs that were never intended to do that. Fast food restaurants. Our economy is skewed toward pushing people toward debt and toward poverty.
So basically, you're saying that the economy is forced to do things that perhaps is not the best thing, but because it has to keep going.
Exactly. You were never expected initially to support a family by flipping burgers. Now, people may have that job plus another job plus another part-time job in an effort to make ends meet. So it's not entirely the fault of the consumer that they get over their heads.
Thank you. We have to go on our second break. Stay with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Today we're addressing finances, credit, and debt. Stay with us.
Welcome to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection, bringing you issues, addressing issues that are important to you, I believe. I believe we are in tune with the community needs. We are all over the place in the community as AARP. Personally, we know people. We know that there are some issues out there, and our job is to try to get issue experts to address those issues. And credit and debt is one of those issues that, I get calls. My cell phone is all over the place. I get calls, and that's why I was desperate to look for help. And a lot of times it's not easy to get a nonprofit, free or at a low cost help. And sometimes you just have to get the help, even if it costs you, because you have to get out of the drowning, right? Let us move on to, okay, so here's a person who is building the credit. What are ways to protect your credit? Because, there could be issues. What are ways to protect your credit?
I would start by getting your free credit report.
Okay.
Yeah. So you get one free report from the 3 credit bureaus from annualcreditreport.com once a year, every 12 months. And it's free.
Got it. So credit reports, so you end up with 3 a year, basically.
Yes.
Another way? I'm sure you're familiar with credit freeze. any one of you credit freeze. What this is an amazing thing, and we just learned that whereas in the past you had to pay, in some states it was free, some states they had to pay like $5 to freeze your credit, is going to be free nationwide. I believe it starts in September, if I'm not mistaken, 2018, where credit freezes. In other words, freezing your credit is going to be free of charge.
I was going to touch on a different aspect of being able to protect your credit. I think now, especially given the fact that I would say most of the population has a smartphone or apps, use of apps, being able to self-monitor your own spending and your own credit. I think it's really important to, maybe once a week at least, check your smartphone, check the app, see, if your spending is what you've been spending on. I make it a habit every week.
So there is an app that can help you control or keep track or stay, be faithful to your budget, kind of?
There's a few out there.
Okay.
It really is kind of self.
Right.
Being very
proactive.
Proactive. And for example, I look at my bank statements once a week just to make sure that nothing is errant, nothing is sort of out of place, because you never know. I mean, I've been hit in the past.
And that's why the credit reports are so critical, because when you pull your credit reports, that report is going to contain anything and everything, any entity that has done inquiries of your credit or perhaps even gotten credit under your Social Security number. If that was to happen, it will appear on the credit report. So what is the website? Is www.annualcreditreport.com. And don't go to free credit report,
don't
because
Google
that's
search.
Don't go to that. Yeah, it has to be annualcreditreport.com. Let's move on, because we still have a good amount of information to cover. Let's say somebody is beginning to sense that the water is the level of water is growing. There's a sense of, I'm going to drown in debt. What are just initially, what can they do? That's before they're sent to collections. That's before they drown. It's just they just beginning to sense. What are some good practices that people can do?
Well, it's never too early to seek a consultation at Community Legal Services with respect to your overall debt situation to determine whether bankruptcy is going to be of benefit to you now or perhaps at some later point when you are collectible. So even though you're not ready to say, I want to file bankruptcy, you can still request a financial evaluation. When you call in or apply, tell them you'd like some bankruptcy advice, and with the aid of your credit report and an interview, we will be able to assist you in evaluating your situation.
Now, is it a good practice if you're beginning to feel the water level going up to just stop making the payments? I mean, you really feel it. It's coming.
Never.
Okay, so
So I think it all still goes back to the spending plan, because sometimes people have money in their budget that they don't know that they have. They keep living the lifestyle that they're currently living. Mm-hmm. You have to really look at where you're spending your money, because sometimes they might be able to make some tweaks and some changes to what they're spending money on to get to a better place.
Now, can someone, and is it recommended that they look for a loan with better APR that will cover all the debts that they have? Is that something that proactively a person can and should do?
They can.
If they can find it.
I'm still going to go back to your spending plan so that you can actually map out what you have, write out every loan you have, the interest rate, any fees, and then start there to kind of see where you are.
Right.
I would like to caution against one type of consolidation company that we frequently encounter. These companies that say, you don't need to file bankruptcy, we'll get your debt under control, send us a certain amount of money, and we'll get you out of your debt. I would be very, very hesitant to deal with one
Can
of
you
those companies.
briefly tell us how they work? How does a settlement, a company that tries to consolidate your debt work, basically? So you already said that they're going to charge you a fee.
An administrative fee. their profit
They're
margin.
going to tell you not to make the payments?
We'll do it for you.
Oh.
We'll negotiate for you. Don't make payments. We'll handle it. That is a red flag. If anybody wants you to send them money to deal with their debt and they're not a bankruptcy firm,
Right.
you've got a real red flag. And at that point, again, you need advice.
So that are the folks joining a radio show understand what is the concept again? Is that a debt settlement, debt
They call
consolidation?
themselves by various names.
Okay.
Debt consolidation companies, debt negotiation companies. Typically, they say, don't file bankruptcy. We'll keep you out of bankruptcy. I have yet to see a happy outcome with one of those.
Okay, so let's go. So, can a person individually reach out to the creditors to try to negotiate better terms? Is that
Yes,
something?
they can. Yeah, that's really where they should start.
Okay.
The creditor wants the money. They really want it. But sometimes people are, if they don't have the money, they don't want to answer the phone. They don't want to reach out. But that's really where you should start.
So you can call your credit card company and says, you know what, I'm having financial issues. Can we?
They might be able to renegotiate your payment amount. They want the money. They'll work
right,
with you.
Right. Okay. So we have to move on. Let's say that somebody has sold your debt. What is a collection company, right? A collection company is basically a company that specializes in buying people's debt to then go at a what is it, a pennies for the dollar, they say, and then they want to they embark in collecting as much as they can.
The biggest debt buyers, especially in this area of the country, are Midland, Portfolio, and a few others. They buy the debt, they sue on the debt. Their business model is based on default judgments. They do not expect most people to defend. And the problem becomes is that a judgment debt will follow you the rest of your life. They're only good 5 years, but they're renewable an indefinite amount of times.
Okay, so here's a person who has maybe missed a payment or two. They can try to negotiate with the creditors directly. Now let's move to a scenario where somebody's debt has been sold. So now they stop hearing from, in most cases, from the institution, but now they're hearing from a collection company, correct? What is that scenario? What are they supposed to do now?
See a lawyer, frankly, because they will. It's going to take more than one or two defaults before the debt's sold. But if they're contacted by a debt buyer, eventually a suit will follow unless they reach a payment plan. And if they do reach a payment plan, they better have it in writing or it's not worth the paper it's not written on. But if it's at the point where you're being sued by a debt buyer, you need financial advice.
And you mentioned sues, being sued. Does that apply to people who have smaller debt or now bigger debt, or it doesn't matter? They'll sue you if you don't pay them. Is that?
I've seen suits for under $1,000.
Okay.
I've seen suits over $10,000, over $20,000.
Okay.
It whatever the debt is, they've bought it. They're going to sue on it and get a judgment if they can. And hopefully, if not now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, you'll have an asset or a wage that the creditor will seek to collect on.
Here's a scenario. Somebody's debt has been sold. They are hearing from the collector, right? From collections, and they don't do anything. They just don't answer the phone. Years go by. What's going to happen if they're not sued? Because if they're sued, then they have to listen to or pay attention to that documents that are going to be coming their way. But what if no documents and there's no sue ever? What happens in that scenario? After a few years of not listening, not paying attention to any phone calls or anything?
Well, I mean, there are statute of limitations. There's a 6-year time period within which creditors must bring suit.
Right.
However, every time you use that card, it's another 6 years.
Right. Or I understand that even if you admit that you owe or make us, they're going to try to get you to make a very small payment because that triggers a new period of 5-6 years, correct?
That is correct.
Wow. This is unbelievable. And again, regrettably, there's lots of this happening in our country with across the board, I believe. And we really, so basically from what I gather is that once you reach a point, that kind of a scenario, you have got to get advice ASAP, correct?
Right. If you're dealing with debt buyers, it's definitely time to see.
No, you call them debt buyers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Debt. DEBT.
Right, debt.
Yeah.
Okay. We have to go on our last break, and we're going to tackle the last resort, bankruptcy, as the last resort in our last segment. Stay with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. This is our last segment. We are addressing finances, credit, and debt. And let's go and talk about bankruptcy. This is an ugly, ugly word. It sounds ugly. Bankrupt. Bankrupt. You're bankrupt. Bankruptcy, right? You go bankrupt, and then bankruptcy is the noun, the action. You're in bad shape. So we basically, and before we move to bankruptcy, we have someone on Facebook ask a question, how about medical debt? And we kind of agree that the first thing is to try to negotiate the debt with the institution, being probably a hospital, try to negotiate paying plans if possible. And if not, that debt could become just regular debt if they sell it to a debt buyer, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Bankruptcy. So what's now? I seem to gather, Brad, that bankruptcy doesn't just happen when you're totally drowned, but it can happen early on. And what is bankruptcy? If you can help us understand, either or.
It should be viewed as a tool, and it should be used when appropriate to begin with a fresh slate. When bankruptcy should occur, when it will benefit you, depends on your circumstances, what assets you have, which are subject to bankruptcy, trustee taking them, whether your income source is totally exempt. Social Security is exempt from creditors.
Okay.
If that's your only income, you don't need bankruptcy. The only creditors that can go after your Social Security are federal creditors, creditors. You may also have obligations for child support or spousal support, but you can't get rid of those in bankruptcy anyway. So there are a number of factors that we look at to determine whether bankruptcy is an appropriate tool, and if so, when it's appropriate to utilize it.
So if and when, correct? If it's
and
appropriate and when. Arturo, bankruptcy, I understand there are two chapters. And by the way, before we forget, there is this website that anybody contemplating bankruptcy should know. Is uscourts.gov. uscourts.gov. You will learn a lot of information about bankruptcy. You'll educate yourself, and then you'll be ready to move on to the next steps. Arturo?
Absolutely, yes. So actually, before we get into the sort of the different types of bankruptcy, it's important, I think, to acknowledge what can happen if you do not file for bankruptcy. Because the magic word here is judgment. A creditor can sue for the debt owed to them, and they go to the courts and they say, hey, person A owes me $10,000 for so and so debt, and if you, as a debtor, do not respond to a lawsuit, a default judgment can result, and the judgment is really what gives a creditor sort of the ammunition to go after your wages, garnish your wages, repossess a car, whatever it might be. But they have to obtain that court order, that judgment.
Right.
So it's important to note that if you do not file for bankruptcy, the traditional lawsuit and judgment, that's how they can come after you.
So bankruptcy basically puts an end to that scenario of creditors coming after you?
Absolutely. So when you file for bankruptcy, and the two sort of types of bankruptcy most common for individual debtors are Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. But once you file for bankruptcy, there is what's called an automatic stay put in place. And that is essentially a court order saying, creditors, you cannot repossess this car during the filing of bankruptcy. And I even think it means they can't even contact the debtors. So it's essentially just a period where a debtor can be free of any creditor attempting to obtain their assets or even contact them.
Yeah. And go ahead, Brad. Let me just make a little comment here, a brief comment. There seems to me that there's this consideration from people that I've spoken with, the consumers. They think it's just a way to just get rid of debt, but I think there's a little red light or a warning that if they have assets and that assets are not exempt, correct?
Correct.
Can you go ahead and
Okay. First of all, I wanted to comment that a lot of people say, well, I don't want to file bankruptcy. I want to keep my car. I want to keep my house. Generally, particularly our clients who qualify for our services, you're not going to lose your house. You're not going to lose your car. Just keep making the mortgage payments. Just keep making the car payments. And I'm sorry, your specific question?
Yeah, well, that there are, people, if they have unprotected assets, that is a big consideration, when they're thinking about filing bankruptcy, because there seems to be that a lot of people just see the side of just, I'm going to get rid of this debt, but you have to be careful, from what I gather, about the unprotected assets, correct?
Right, and the principal concerns are usually the car and the home. And your home, we have an exemption in Arizona, a homestead exemption of $150,000. That means before you need to worry about that, you have to have $150,000 or more equity in your home. Hardly anybody does. With respect to your car,
Are you saying if somebody does, they would have to be concerned that they can go after that equity?
right, but I've yet to see anybody come to visit us that has more than $150,000 equity value above their mortgage balance.
Right.
So that's not a concern. A car is also exempt up to $6,500. That means you're not going to lose your car if it's not worth at least $6,500 more than you owe on it.
So the concept here is that the creditors they're going to get paid if possible, correct? The judge is going to say, you know what, you have this unprotected assets. We're going to go after them. We're going to get as much as we can to pay the creditors, and then we'll write off everything and you'll be clean. Is that kind of like the thought here?
Yeah, Chapter 7 discharges debt. That means you no longer have a personal obligation to pay the debt, but it doesn't discharge liens. The creditor, whether it's a mortgage company or a car lender, retains their ability to get the asset if you don't make payments. If you don't make payments.
Right. Scenarios. You don't have to mention names, but what type of scenarios have you seen play out in your field, if possible, that you can share? Just very general.
The only type of situation we've encountered with non-exempt assets is where a person may own more than one car.
Okay.
If they own more than one car, you only get your exemption for one car, I believe.
Okay.
But that's the only time it arises.
Now, because you in your field, community legal services, you deal with a lot of people who qualify based on federal poverty level. They may not have a lot. but then you can move to another scenario where there's people who have a lot of money, so that could change things, right? There could be assets, unprotected assets that people can go after.
Exactly, especially if you have investment accounts that aren't protected under ERISA. But again, we don't encounter those type of clients at our
Right. Now, it just cost-wise, when bankruptcies, I assume they vary based on complexity. Are we talking about in the thousands of dollars, in the 1 to 3, the 3 to 5, 10,000? What can people expect to pay when they're dealing with bankruptcy?
Are you talking outside
The
community
client,
legal services?
yes, outside. Of course, in your case, if they qualify, there probably won't be any cost.
Exactly. I would say most Chapter 7s are still $1,500 to $2,000.
Not too bad. Not too bad. Yeah, considering all things considered, right? Yeah. Go ahead, Arturo.
Yeah, so I think we've spent some time here talking about Chapter 7, but I think it's also important to note that there's also Chapter 13, and the big difference that between a Chapter 7 debtor and a Chapter 13 debtor is, let's say you do have a steady source, a steady flow of income coming in the door. You have a steady job, and you just have a difficult time keeping up with the car payment or the mortgage payment. In those situations where you have a debtor that has this steady source of income, Chapter 13 might be their best resource instead of a Chapter 7. In a Chapter 7, as we've discussed, the bankruptcy trustee can liquidate or sell off your assets. In Chapter 13, typically that does not happen because you get to retain and keep that car, keep that home.
Right.
But you do have to make a payment plan and keep up with that payment plan.
I try to get resources for, so that when I get calls, and it's not easy to get a lot of resources out there. Community legal service is great resource, but they have to qualify. Obviously, the attorneys are there to help you, obviously at a cost. Just, we are about to end. Suli, final thoughts. I mean, what is your takeaway, or what is the recommendation? I mean, I know that budget, it seems to we always seem to come back to budget, and we only have a few seconds.
That's the foundation. I don't think that debt is really normal. It doesn't have to be normal. I would encourage people to work on getting out of debt so that you can live a financially well life, take care of your family.
Yeah, it's I always say that there's a lot of things being thrown at us from society, pressures to live in a certain way, to drive this kind of car and have this kind of home and celebrate all the festivities that come our way. It's going to have to take big decisions as to how you're going to design your life, what type of budget you have, and what that budget allows you, the luxuries that it allows you. We have to go. We are out of time. I want to thank again Suli Richardson from Desert Financial, Arturo Gonzales, attorney at law. And now, do you do all kinds of law? I mean, do you address several areas in law, or criminal, or what do you do?
So our firm does. It's a civil law firm. So not only bankruptcy, but employment, real estate, estate planning, wills, trusts. So
good.
It runs the gamut.
Thank you. And then Brad, and I did not said your last name earlier, Gelder.
Correct.
Brad Gelder from Community Legal Services. Thank you very much. And we really hope that you out there are listening and following us on Facebook at AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. You're enjoying this show. Thank you so very much for joining us today. Have yourselves a good week. Take care.